and welcome. So I had a couple of people say that they did want to know how I ended up with so many rats, and I figured why not? That could be a fun video. So here we are. And here's my cat. Yep, shark tail right in front of the camera. It's not like some huge elaborate story or anything, but y'all were curious, so let's just get into it. I initially started with two. Their names were Boo and Shriek. I am planning on doing like an all the rats I've ever had, like mini series of videos, so I won't go into too much detail. But basically from 2009 to 2020, like the very beginning of 2020, I never had more than 5 rats, which I know might sound funny to you now considering I currently have 18 and I had 20. The most I've had is 20. I kept only up to 5 rats until 2019 or until 2020, early 2020. Around 2017 is when I got my 3 rats, Caper, Clover, and Ruffian. Now the thing with the 3 of them is at this point I was starting to feel like the beginnings of rat burnout. So if you've been in the community for a while, you'll see people often talk about how they're done owning rats, and I've talked about it myself on this channel with Cappy and with other people. And the thing with that is that owning rats comes with a lot of hardships. You guys have been seeing me go through it. You're going to continue seeing me go through it. And it's just hard. Rats are kind of brutal pets. And then to compound that, I just wasn't feeling particularly close to any of the rats I had been getting. And I didn't know why, but I was going to soldier on. And then when Ruffian passed away in 2019, May 2019, I believe, I decided that maybe I'd be done after Caper and Clover. So I started researching because I had known about accreditation. I'd been looking into accreditation for my rats because at the time I had only 3 rats. So I had a small cage that I wouldn't recommend now. It was one of those like super tall cages that have the plastic ramps that clip onto the bars that I don't like. But I had been looking into accreditation and I was like, well, if I still want accreditation and I still want some kind of exotic pet, I should figure out something that could go into the accreditation. So I was doing research on all sorts of rodents that could live in accreditation. So I was looking into ferrets, sugar gliders. Ferrets aren't rodents, but you get what I mean. Ferrets, sugar gliders, even guinea pigs, though I didn't think, I quickly realized they would not work with accreditation. I was looking into hedgehogs. I was looking into pretty much any pet you can think of, chinchillas, degus. I was doing research on them, trying to figure out what would work for me. So time keeps going. And Caper, this is around July, she had a stroke. So she started having a lot of trouble navigating her cage, and it got to the point where I really had to figure something out because putting the ramps back in didn't work because Clover knew how to pop them off the bars. So I put them in. Caper would be good for a day or two, and then at night Clover would go and she'd shove her nose up under the hooks and she'd pop them off and everything would fall. And it was very dangerous for Caper because she wasn't as mobile as she was before the stroke. So finally I just bit the bullet and I got this accreditation. Yes, I went for the double immediately, even though I only had 2 rats and I wasn't sure I was going to get more. I don't know why. I just did. I went for the double. Caper loved it. She loved the accreditation. She loved that she could utilize everything. I kept all the shelving and the ramps in for her. And Clover spent all of her time at the bottom of the cage in the nest she built, absolutely refusing to go anywhere else in that cage, even to follow Caper. And the 2 of them were very bonded. So Clover had a bit of an attitude about the whole thing. But basically, at this point, I knew Caper did not have very long left. And so I was really doubling down on my pet research, trying to figure out where I wanted to go after she and Clover passed. And at some point, because I was talking to Cappy about like everything, every animal I could possibly get. And at some point, Cappy looks at me and she said, "Hey, listen, you can get whatever pet. I'll support you. I'll help you as needed. You're going to do the research, so it's going to be fine. But it sounds like you're looking for an animal that is exactly like a rat, but lives longer than a rat. And you're not going to find that. And you need to accept that now." And I kind of realized she was right. So with that in mind, I decided to get at least one more set of rats and see how I felt. So when I lost Caper and I had just Clover, I went and got 2 more rats. Their names were Button Bright and Pilot. And intros with Clover were really easy, and I had them in a really big cage, and it was kind of sad seeing just the 3 rats in such a large cage. It is fine to do that, but for me it was kind of sad because it's such a large cage, and the 3 of them, Clover was still having her attitude problem, refusing to go to the top, and Button Bright was only living at the top, so Pilot was splitting her time between them, and it was like a whole thing. So I decided to get 2 more rats, and their names were Rook and Rowley. So at this point I had 5 rats. I did intros. They were rough intros. Pilot was a pain in the butt, but we got through the intros and everything was fine. It was smooth. Rook and Rowley chose to stay with Button Bright, but that meant Pilot could spend more time with Clover. And I don't know what it was about these rats. I don't know what I did different or what they did different. I can't explain it, but there was something about Button Bright, Pilot, Rook and Rowley that just rejuvenated my love for rats. Pilot, I usually say, is like one of my ultimate heart rats. Even though I wouldn't necessarily say I was closer with Pilot than I am with Hex, because Hex is a very, very sweet girl. She's very snuggly, she's very sweet. And I can't even say I love Hex more than I love any of my others. I don't currently have a heart rat because I just love them all so much. But because Pilot specifically just brought so much joy to my life at that point, I do consider her still one of my like ultimate heart rats. And they just like brought my love of rats right back to the forefront, rejuvenated it, made it stronger, and I just loved them so, so much. So the breeder I got Rook and Rowley from also had fawns, and fawns is one of my favorite varieties. So I had this big old cage. I was like out of the dregs of burnout, and I was thinking, okay, well, maybe I could get a pair of fawns. And at that point, Clover was also very, very old. She was 2 years and 4 months old, which is quite old for a rat. And I knew she was going to pass soon. So once Clover passed and the fawns were born, I decided to let the breeder know I was interested. And that's how I got Daisy and Asher. I got them in the beginning of 2020, like January 2020, I think 2 days before my birthday. Now, Daisy and Asher fit right in. Their intros were so smooth. Pilot did not have a problem with them. Rook and Rowley did not have a problem with them. Button Bright never had a problem at first. She and Asher had like a weird relationship later in life, but at first they were fine. And I was feeling good. I had these bees. They were lovely. I had 6 children, which is the most I'd ever had. And I was just like in love with them. I loved it. So around this time, I was also following some rat rescues because I was thinking ahead, and I was like, okay, so I should keep an eye on what's available around me, because I was thinking that I would continue my rat owning journey at this point, and I have, as you can see. And this was in March of 2020, so like right around when things started getting really bad in 2020. But one of the rat rescues I followed posted a group of babies, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was reading their story, and they were talking about this one rat who fell out of the nest as a baby, as like a little pinky. And when they found her, she was cold to the touch and lethargic, but they just kind of popped her back in the nest and hoped for the best. And she managed to bounce back, but she was very clearly the runt of the litter. She was a third their size. And I was like, oh, that's so sad. And then I scrolled and looked at the pictures, and I saw her face. And I was like, oh, that's my rat. She belongs with me. So I contacted the rescue, and I snatched her up before anyone else could. And then Cappy picked out the other rat I was going to bring home with me. And this was Willow and Walsey. This is where things start to get a little shaky. Because I was thinking that it would be similar with Daisy and Asher, where I did intros. Sorry, Orville's moving around. Hi, Orvie. I was thinking it'd be similar with Daisy and Asher, where I would do intros. They'd go into the cage together. It might be a little rocky, but it wouldn't be the worst thing ever because I knew how everyone was going to act. So I was just going to go along with it. And then I'd be done. I'd have 8 rats in my cage, and I wouldn't get any more until some passed. Willow and Walsey. Willow and Walsey did not do great during intros, and I understood why. They were a little bit smaller than the rest of my rats. Willow especially, she did eventually catch up, but she was quite small for quite a long time. So they kind of panicked when they met them because they were being introduced to these 6 larger rats, and sometimes rats, when they're a lot smaller than who you're introducing them to, get defensive. And that's what happened with Willow and Walsey. So I set them aside in their baby cage, which was at the time a single critter nation that I had got specifically for babies. So I would just let them rest in their baby cage, and I was thinking, okay, that's fine. I will just introduce them when they're a bit older, when I'm feeling more up to it. Now, when I picked up Willow and Walsey, my friend Kendra picked up Willow's sister, Rivia. And she was having a lot of trouble with Rivia because Rivia didn't have a companion and her rats were rejecting her quite hard. And when it became clear that her rats weren't going to accept Rivia, Kendra was like, yeah, I think you're right and I need to do this. So we found someone who was rehoming rats, and we didn't realize until we were there to pick them up that she was a feeder breeder who got overly attached to her stock and wanted to rehome them as pets as opposed to snake food. So after hearing that, Kendra was just like, yeah, I'll take both of them, because she had like 2 baby girls, and she's like, yeah, I'm just gonna take both of them, because she didn't want the rest of them being snake food. Can you guess what happened? So basically, she had them for, this was in May, she had them for a couple of weeks, and she sent me a picture of Nova. And I was looking at her, and I was like, she looks very big. And Kendra's just like, she's just going to be a huge rat. And in my brain, I was like, oh no. But I was going to see Kendra the next day. Kendra's pretty much the only person Cappy and I saw during the entire pandemic, and we were the only person she saw. So we'd hang out fairly frequently. I go over and I say, hey Kendra, I need to see Nova. And she's trying to get her out. Nova's kind of freaking out because she doesn't want to be handled because she was very pregnant at the time. And Kendra's just like, I just don't know what to do. And I said, Kendra, I think she's pregnant. And my friend looked at me. Such a look of horror that I will remember it for the rest of my life. And a few days later, Nova gave birth to 12 babies, 11 of which made it to adulthood. Because this was during the pandemic, and because of everything going on, I told Kendra, look, I'll just take 3 of them. At this point, I already had 8 rats, but I was like, I'll just take 3 of them. I'll bond them to Willow and Walsey, and I'll just have 2 groups. We'll just be done with it at that point. And Cappy decided to take 2. That was Wicket and Wookie. And Kendra kept the rest. So it was 4 boys and 2 girls that Kendra kept. So at this time, Critter Nations were out of stock everywhere, and I only had a single story, so I was a little worried about that. By pure circumstance, the Critter Nation add-ons came into stock, just the add-ons, the night before Nova gave birth, and I purchased one immediately without thinking about it, because while 5 rats can fit in a single story, I just prefer 2 story for 5 rats. So I purchased the add-on, and it's actually the Weather Girls cage that was the original single story and the add-on that I got later. So I went from 8 rats to 11 rats by bringing home Merritt, Mercy, and Humdrum. So at that point, I was just like, okay, I have 11 rats. I need to cool it. No more rats for a bit. And I didn't get any rats for about 8 months. Around that point, a lot of my rats were getting a little bit older. This was 2021, so Pilot and Bud and Bright were just a couple months away from being 2. And I decided this is where things really go off the rails. I decided to get 3 baby rats so that I could introduce them to my group of 5, and then when my older group got older, I was going to either incorporate them into one big group and put my 2 Critter Nations together, or just keep the 1 cage and have 1 smaller group. I hadn't decided at the time, but I needed younger rats just to keep a rolling group going, basically, and 8 months is a good age gap for that, or it should be. Obviously Humdrum lived way longer than I expected, and so did Sailor. But I went and got Heidi, Riff Raff, and Sailor. Immediately started having problems with Sailor and Humdrum. The 2 of them hated each other. During intros, it took like 3 weeks for them to stop sniping at each other, and then they'd still have squabbles. And it was so frustrating. I tried so hard to get Sailor to calm down and accept Humdrum. And if you've been here a while, you know how this ended, which is at 6 months old, Sailor developed hormonal aggression. I ended up having to separate Sailor from the rest of the group to get her spayed. And at this point, my other group were all very old. They were all almost over 2 or just about 2. And I was thinking a lot of thoughts at the time. I was just like, okay, well, I don't really want to put Bud and Bright and Pilot with Sailor because she'll kick their ass. And I don't want to do intros without Sailor. I'm going to have to do intros with Sailor back to her original group. And by the time that's done, Bud and Bright and Pilot might be extremely old. I didn't want to do intros with extremely old rats because I hate that. I end up having to do it a lot, but I hate it. So At the same time, that rescue that I got Willow and Welsie from got an intake of 20-some baby rats. And I was just like, okay. And I watched the little video to see if any of them spoke to me the way Willow spoke to me. And I saw Ducky's face. And I had that same feeling that, oh, this is my rat feeling. So I contacted the rescue and I put in an application for 2 baby rats so that I could get my other group of girls, which at this time was only 5. It was Button Bright, Pilot, Rook, Rowley had died, and then Daisy and Asher. So I got Ducky and Dorothy. They were supposed to go in with my group of 5, and I was hoping to get Sailor back in with her sisters and my Willow, Welsie, and then my Novas. That was the plan. Things rarely go to plan. The point that I got Ducky and Dorothy, I had 13 rats. So I had 15, and I was like, okay, this is it. I had no more. You can see how my plans fall apart. But I was like, okay, I'm just going to stick with this. We're not going to worry about, we're not going to get any more. So I couldn't get Sailor back in with her group because she hated Humdrum. She hated Humdrum so much. So I ended up taking Heidi and Riff Raff out and seeing if Sailor would accept them. And she did, immediately. So I had 3 groups at this point. I had my group of 5, I had 2 groups of 5 and a group of 3, and then I had Ducky and Dorothy. And I tried to get Ducky and Dorothy in with my older group. And the problem with Ducky and Dorothy is they were very, very obnoxious little babies. They would scream bloody murder anytime someone touched them. They would not allow any kind of interaction that involved dominance to happen. They would scream, they would run. And it was very frustrating for my older rats to the point that it would start to become more and more hostile, and I would end up having to separate. I tried Ducky and Dorothy with both of my adult groups. I didn't, and I even tried them with Sailor. Sailor immediately tried to kill them. But with my other 2 adult groups, it was the same situation of like escalating tension until it got to the point where I had to separate for the safety of everyone involved. And about 4.5 months after I got Ducky and Dorothy is when Cappy's rat Wicked passed away. So we put Ducky and Dorothy in with Wookie. It worked beautifully, and that was that. But my older rats had been passing away at this point, and I ended up losing Button Bright, Pilot, Rook, Daisy and Asher, and Welsie, all very close together. So I was down a lot of rats. I had, I believe, 9 at this point, and there was just no rats available. The rat rescue only had intact males available. Obviously, I couldn't get them because at that point, only 3 of my rats were spayed. 2 of them were living with Wookie, which was Ducky and Dorothy, and Cappy wanted to give them back to me. So she was on the waiting list for a breeder. I was on the waiting list for 2 breeders, and it was months of waiting for female rats to be available, even to breeders. One was on hiatus, and one was having litters, but it was very small litters with just males available. So the plan at that point was Cappy would get her 3 rats, I would get 3 from one breeder, and we were hoping the breeders would have litters far enough apart that I could still get both. But the plan was for Cappy to get her 3 rats, get Ducky and Dorothy back to me. I was going to try intros again. And then I was going to, at that point, this Critter Nation was empty. So I was going to try to rebuild this mischief slowly with space between the ages. But what actually happened was both breeders had litters available at the same time. And so I decided to go ahead and get those babies that I wanted, which turned out to be what used to be my group of 7 girls, because I have no sense of my own self-preservation emotionally. But mainly the reason I did this is because my other cage was down to 3 girls. Willow, I knew, was passing away very soon. She had pituitary tumor, so it was just my 3 Novas, and I was going to put Ducky and Dorothy in with them, and intros with Wookie and Cappy's girls fell apart immediately. It was just way too much for Wookie. She was 2 years old at this point. We had no idea how long she was going to live. We just knew that she was not doing well with them. It was stressing her out too much. So we ended up just keeping her with Ducky and Dorothy. But before that, our plan was to put Ducky and Dorothy in with my Novas. So I ended up putting all 7 babies together in this cage because I didn't think I was going to need them for my Novas. I thought Ducky and Dorothy were going to go in with the Novas. When that didn't work out, my Novas reached 2 years old and then started showing signs of their age, and I realized someone was going to be alone very soon. And I didn't want 8 rats in this cage because it was a lot to deal with already. Orville peed everywhere all the time, and I just didn't want to deal with it with an 8th rat in there. So it was around this time that I started to realize I needed to figure out something to do with Humdrum, who I was rapidly realizing was going to be the last one left of my Novas. I couldn't put her in with Sailor because Sailor hated her. I didn't want to overcrowd one of my cages. So my options were either to do intros with Ducky, Dorothy, and Wookie and have her live in Cappy's cage, or get more babies. It just so happens around this time that the Weather Girls popped up, and they were in a situation where they needed to get out of it pretty badly. So the person I got them from was someone who decided they were going to breed rats but didn't know anything about them. And essentially, by the time I got to them, they hadn't been fed for several days, and they were very, very thin. The person was feeding them just dog kibble. They weren't able to take care of them, basically. So I brought them home, I got them fed up, and I got them in with Humdrum. So at this point, I had this mischief squared away, that mischief squared away, and I was good. I was like, we're good. My original plan with Ducky and Dorothy when they came back to me was get them in with the Weather Girls and Humdrum. Again, we didn't know how long Wookie was going to live. Then my rat Heidi started to have seizures. Heidi at this point was living with Sailor and Riff Raff, her sisters. Now, at the time, the seizures came out of nowhere and they were very obviously neurological. And I didn't think she was going to live very long because we suspected she had a pituitary tumor. And we got her on medication for it. But I just didn't think she was going to live very long. Pituitary tumors, typically, once you see clinical signs, they develop rapidly. So I had to start thinking about what I was going to do about Sailor, because I knew in my gut Sailor was going to outlive her sisters. So I had tried females. I had never tried males with her. So I decided to go get a pair of neutered boys, which was Fitz and Ezra. Now, I didn't know if it would work or not. In fact, in my gut, I felt like it wouldn't, but I had to try because I wanted Sailor to be happy. So I ended up getting Fitz and Ezra. After a quarantine period, I did try intros. She did try to kill both of them. So I ended up separating, and around that time is also when Wookie passed away. So I got Ducky and Dorothy in with Fitz and Ezra, and at this point I had 4 groups. And let's see, 7 plus 4 is 11, plus 3 is 14, plus 4 is 18. And Cappy had 3, I believe, at the time. So that's where my rat situation stood. And I was just gonna roll with that. I was good with that. Because everyone was in a group of more than 2. We were happy, we had it figured out, I was rolling with it. So once we moved, some of my rats started passing away. I ended up getting Sailor in with her girls, and because I had a full year gap between the last rats I got, I decided to go ahead and get some babies, which were Curtains, Lamb, and Suitor. But because all of my rats were so close in age, I already had a bunch of rats. I think when I got them, I had 16 rats. Yeah, I think that's right. I think I had 16 rats. So I got them and I had 19 rats. But I did need them to kind of keep my ages rolling, because if anything happened to anyone else, I could do intros with them and it would work. And then Humdrum passed away, which left the Weather Girls alone. And they have attitude problems. I've mentioned it many times before. So I decided to do the same thing I did with Sailor and try them with boys. And the first intro failed, but I am going to try again. That's when I got Baker and Barber, which brought my count up to 20 rats. But I was still rolling with it. I could still take care of everybody. I was happy with it, honestly. I like having a lot of rats. I just get a lot of joy out of rats. And I didn't have too many groups, I felt, so I was just rolling with it. At this point, we're pretty much caught up. I did get the dwarfs after a couple of my rats passed because I wanted to try dwarf rats. And I do love them. They're amazing little rats. But yeah, that's basically how I ended up with so many rats. Is I had a lot of rats with attitude problems. I had a lot of sick rats. It was intro hell for a bit, which is why I hate intros. But that is how I ended up with so many rats. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.